While it is true that I have ranted and railed against the use of punishments with kids who have misbehaviors on this channel, the truth is there is an appropriate time, place, and way to use them. Hi out there, this is Dr. Brett Pearce, child psychologist, and today I'd like to talk with you about the appropriate use of consequences with kids. So, consequences can have their place. I still insist that they're overused and that they should be used sort of judicially, meaning, we should try to think about other things in terms of helping kids with misbehaviors, like problem solving, addressing needs, thinking about what skills the kid needs in order to meet expectations, etc. However, there is a time and place, and sometimes we end up sort of having to use consequences in order to do things like, ensure safety and the like. So there are basically three guidelines that I would suggest for appropriately using consequences with kids. And indeed, the first one is that the consequence should be appropriate, and that is to say, appropriate to the context, like it needs to logically connect with what's going on, and also it needs to be appropriate in its severity, I guess would be the way of saying it. The second thing, second guideline that I'm proposing in this video is that consequences need to endeavor to guide, support, and sort of educate the kid. They should be about that, not sort of getting back at the kid because we're upset. It's okay for us to be upset. It's just that consequences need to be growth promoting. And the third guideline for appropriate consequences with kids is that consequences should be producing meaningful behavioral change, or at least serving a really good function, like enforcing safety or something like that. Enforcing, that's not quite the right word. Ensuring safety. So let's dive right in. So number one, the first thing is that consequences need to be appropriate, which is to say they need to logically connect with the situation and the behavior. And they also need to be of appropriate severity, which is to say, not too harsh. So let's talk about this first area of the consequences need to be appropriate. If I were 5-year-old Bobby, and I've got this cool, ball thing. Hey, gotta have a chance to use a toy in the video. You know me. So if I'm throwing this around the house and I'm being inappropriate with it, and I've been warned not to be too rough with it, and then boom, I throw it, boom, crash, splash, something gets broken. It would not make sense, I think, to say, okay, well, I'm now taking your video games away for a week. It just doesn't have any connection to this behavior. And therefore, it isn't really fair, I don't think. It's not really fair, and it doesn't really connect. It just feels like this, well, I can take things away from you, kid, kind of thing to do. And there's nothing wrong with, again, being like, oh, frustrated. Oop. Timer, I gotta go check my chicken here in a bit. We'll do so after I'm done recording. Rather, it would make a lot more sense to be like, okay, Bobby, I'm now taking your ball away for a few minutes because you need to take a break. You're being way too rough, something like that. The consequence, therefore, should logically connect with the behavior and the context. Otherwise, it tends to breed a lot of frustration. Also, the consequence needs to be, probably a lot smaller than we think. The reason for that is that we tend to learn skills by receiving feedback in the moment and being given the opportunity to then try to implement that feedback. And so when we do something with Bobby, who's, throwing, oh, that's right, I forget. It lights up. Cool. Out of here, and I'm getting distracted. So if we were to take the ball away from Bobby and be like, I'm now taking it away from you for a year, my question for you is, what do you really think that Bobby's going to learn? Well, maybe something, I guess, but Bobby would learn a whole lot more if we took the ball away for 5 or 10 minutes. which is plenty of time, particularly for a 5 or 6 year old. And then we hand it back to Bobby and say, okay, are you ready? Because I told you to be safe and soft with the ball, and it looks like you were having a hard time listening. That's okay. Are you ready to try again? Can you show me safe and soft with the ball? And so, and Bobby can tell us, yeah or no, maybe I don't feel like I'm ready. But the point is, the consequence should be short in severity. And so this definitely, small in severity. And if there's a time base to the consequence, we want that to be quite short. The younger the kid, the shorter it should be, so that we can provide an opportunity for kiddo to receive feedback and implement that feedback. We want to be careful about getting into what I like to call the punishment avalanche, where, or rather the punishment snowball, I suppose, which is to say, well, I provide you with a punishment, you get ticked off and do something back because you want to get back at me, and then I get back at you with another consequence bigger, and then, and then we just sort of snowball out of control, where we just provide more and more severe punishments, and the kiddo is more and more upset, and so are we, and behaviors don't get solved, and in fact they often can get worse in that situation. So first point, consequences should match the context, and they should be appropriate in severity with an eye towards giving the kid another chance to quickly implement feedback. So number two, and this kind of brings me to my second point, which is that consequences should be aimed at guiding and supporting the kid, at educating the kid, at promoting growth. So one good example of this is if we have a kiddo who has, say, they got ticked off at their brother and, broke his toy. The consequence there should really be sort of restitutional or restorative. Which is to say something like the consequence should be about writing an apology letter to brother. Maybe we have to use our allowance to go replace the toy if that seems to be sensible and fair in the context, or do some extra chores to earn enough to replace it. There should be some sense of wanting to teach something to the kid, and by teach I don't mean teach them a lesson. I mean like, oh, we got a cat. Cat cameo. Say hi, Mecca. So, not teach them a lesson like that'll show you kind of thing, but more like, let's actually think like what sort of skills, what sort of perspective does the kid need to gain, and what's an appropriate way for us to do that. And so exactly what to do depends on the context, and if folks have a specific kind of scenario they want me to comment on, you can hit me up in the comments or send me a message or something. So that's the second point. We want the consequence to be geared at guiding. Like it should, we should endeavor for it to do something to help the kid learn from what happened. So the third point I'd like to make, and this of course this brings me to this third point, which is that consequences need to do something useful for everyone, particularly for the kid. So something like me taking the ball away from 5-year-old Bobby is for one, it's going to prevent other stuff from getting broken for a few minutes. And it's also going to provide, a chance for us to kind of sit and think and try again, right? Whereas me taking Bobby's video games away for an hour because he was using the ball incorrectly, I guess it's going to act as sort of a signal like, hey, I'm upset with you and that didn't go well and you really need to take this seriously. But in general, if punishments are not actually helping a kid with a particular behavioral problem, then we have to acknowledge at some point that they're not really serving a good purpose. And we must always acknowledge that actions of any kind, kids, adults, whoever's, they have many different consequences. And a consequence of punishment are things like resentment, anger, maybe developing a negative self-concept, maybe feeling like, you can't succeed, particularly when we're receiving too many punishments too often, or too big of punishments too often. So it's always important for us adults to really ask ourselves why. What is the purpose of the punishment? Is it helping? Is it getting me what I want in terms of getting behavioral change from a kid? And if the answer is no, but we keep doing it, then I really, really think it's important for us adults to slow down and say, why am I really doing this? Is there some sort of frustration or something that's being activated for me that I'm trying to deal with by punishing? It's not wrong to be frustrated. In fact, the frustration can act as a great signal that something needs to happen, that there's some sort of change we need to make to get kiddos' misbehaviors to come down. It's just that, if we don't feel like the punishment is really reducing the misbehaviors, then it doesn't serve a good purpose. Now, other times the punishment might not necessarily be producing behavioral change, but it does serve a good purpose. For example, let's suppose that 5-year-old Bobby, every time he gets into the car, he refuses to wear a seatbelt. And then he's saying to you, well, I really want to go to the park. Can we please go to the park? And we say, well, I'd love to take you to the park, and we need to work on wearing a seatbelt. So we're not going to go to the park until we can deal with that together. So what do we need to do to deal with that together? And in a sense, that's not really a punishment. I mean, it sort of has a consequential kind of feel to it, I guess. But you can see how it just makes sense. Like, we don't drive in the car without the seatbelt. And so even if that's not producing behavioral change right away, it still is serving a good purpose. So, at any rate, thanks for listening. This is Dr. Brett Pearce, child psychologist, talking to you today about the appropriate use of consequences. If you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe. The channel is growing slowly but surely. Last I checked, we were at 42 subscribers, and all 42 of you mean a lot to me, and I am very excited by the slow but steady growth that the channel has experienced. So please do subscribe, give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and smash that bell notification so you can be notified when my next video goes live. For now, we will see you in the next one.